So in this video we're going to show you how to use the ADA ramp designer. It requires that you have an intersection which is either a single ramp or a dual ramp model, and you're going to be using a curb line which is already elevated in 3D. So if I look at this blue line here, you'll see it's already got a min-max elevation and there's elevations been defined along it. And then we've got all these lines here. These are all two-dimensional lines. So these are what we call the ramp lines, this one and this one, or this one and this one. And these are what we call the landing pads. Up here it's drawn as a rectangle or a polygon, and the rest of the lines, the yellow lines, are lines that you can elevate in addition after the fact should you want to do that. And then the purple lines are the inbound and outbound sidewalk to the ADA ramp in the corner here. And so to elevate these, what we're going to do is we're going to run the ADA ramp designer command. We're going to pick, in this case, a dual ramp design, and then the plot scale is defined that allows you to kind of set labels on these lines once they've been elevated to show the slopes of the lines. And the text style that you're going to typically use is going to be defined in sheet units. And so if you have a 0.08 sheet unit and you've got a 10 scale, then your text height will be 0.8 of a foot in height. So you need to make sure that your text style looks correct, and if for any reason you run through the process and the text comes out too large, you can undo, change the scale, and then rerun the command with the same parameters and have it recompute and relabel the area. And these settings are all controlled through RPS settings. So I go to RPS settings and go to the ADA ramp designer settings, and here we have the settings that control this calculation process. So for ramp slopes, which are the slope lines, so in this case I'm talking about these lines right here and these two here. These have an ideal slope which is somewhere between a minimum and maximum value. So the minimum slope can be 2%, the maximum slope is 8%, and in an ideal sense, in this case, we've got it set to 5%. That's going to be the starting slope that's used, and then the slopes will be adjusted if the ramp can't be computed correctly. The slopes will be adjusted up or down to adjust the elevations of the points until they all lie within the min-max range. The landing pad, which is the green rectangle up here, that also has a maximum landing pad slope, a minimum landing pad slope, and somewhere between that is the ideal, and typically that's down towards the low end of the min-max spectrum. So in this case we've got it set for 1.5%, which is the slope that goes between any of these sides, corner to corner. And then we're going to put the labels that we create on a layer called site-ADA labels, and if that layer doesn't exist, it will be created as the command is executed. And then you can pick the text style that you want to use. In this case I'm using the label lines text style from our standard template. We're going to say OK to that. And so now it asks us just to simply select the data in sequence. So we're going to pick the curb line, and then if we're in dual ramp mode, we're going to pick the first ramp pair, which is this line, hold the control key down and pick the second of the pair, and then here we're going to now pick the next pair, and we're going to pick from here and here. And at that point now we've selected the data, and we now just select the pad, and by doing that then it elevates all of the nodes of these lines and calculates the slopes and displays the slopes of these values. So in this case here our ideal slope was 5%. It determined that this point was the lowest point in the sequence, and as a result it added 5% to that to compute this point, and then it used that ideal slope across the pad at 1.5% to compute this point over here, and then the same thing to this back corner over here, the same thing across here to give you the cross slopes on the sidewalks, on the ramp lines. And then you can see here it then elevated these two lines accordingly and worked out the slopes, and they're all within the min-max slope range that we defined of 2% to 8%, and you can see all the elevations of the lines that were generated accordingly. And then here in the information or the results pane, it tells you the name of the line and the slope that was generated for that line, which is what's generated these slope labels for the ramp lines. Now in that case here, once you've defined one, then you could then say go to the next one and do the next one in the same way. If you now want to elevate other lines on this intersection, you could switch mode here to the Smart Edit command, which is in the header bar of the commands. And when you run Smart Edit, you can now pick the elevate lines, sorry, not intersect, I want to go to elevate lines rather, so go to Smart Elevate, and in Smart Elevate you can pick the intersection mode, and intersection mode basically allows us to pick the lines that are intersecting. So in this case we're going to say these are the lines that are already 3D that we already know the elevations of, and the curb line. And then the lines we want to elevate are the two sidewalk lines where they come to touch the green pad, the yellow lines here around the ramp, and then these crossing lines across the road here, across the ramps there. And once you've done that, I missed one there. So once you've picked the lines you want to elevate, you hit apply, and those will now be elevated. And now if we look at that ramp in 3D, we've got a full 3D intersection calculated out there with all the ramp locations elevated correctly within those tolerances, and then you would move to the next one accordingly. So by doing this, you can kind of automate the process. Using switch command, you can go back to the ADA ramp command. I closed it, I think, but if I go back into ADA ramp here, normally when the ADA ramp is running, you can toggle between the Smart Edit, Smart Elevate. If ADA ramp is here, if I go to Smart Elevate,